Trump's global impact. A right-wing perspective. Introduction. Donald Trump's second term marks a necessary shift in global politics, challenging ineffective diplomatic norms, weak leadership, and the burdens placed on America by globalist institutions. While mainstream media and international organizations decry his policies as disruptive, a right-wing perspective reveals that Trump's leadership restores sovereignty, strengthens national security, and ensures that America is no longer taken advantage of by foreign powers. 3 articles, The Guardian, the International Bar Association (IBA), and Foreign Affairs, analyze his return to power, mostly from a critical perspective. However, this essay will challenge their assumptions and argue that Trump's foreign policy is a strategic realignment that prioritizes national interests over global bureaucracy. Challenging the globalist order. The primary concern of all 3 articles is Trump's so-called disruptive effect on global affairs. The Guardian views Trump's rejection of multilateralism as a dangerous shift away from diplomacy, but from a right-wing perspective, this is a necessary correction. For decades, the United States has shouldered the financial and military burden of protecting Europe, funding NATO, and engaging in costly international agreements that do little to benefit everyday Americans. Trump's push to hold allies accountable for their own defense spending is not reckless, it is common sense. The IBA article echoes these concerns, focusing on how Trump's policies allegedly undermine international law. However, this argument assumes that international agreements should take precedence over national sovereignty. Trump's refusal to bow to global institutions like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum is a sign of leadership, not recklessness. These organizations, dominated by unelected bureaucrats, have continuously imposed regulations, climate policies, and trade restrictions that weaken American industries while empowering foreign competitors, particularly China. Foreign Affairs takes a more neutral stance but still suggests that Trump's transactional approach to foreign policy destabilizes global politics. In reality, his policies introduce a long overdue recalibration. Under previous administrations, U.S. foreign aid, military support, and trade policies prioritized foreign interests over American prosperity. Trump's leadership ensures that America engages in international relations from a position of strength, demanding fair trade deals and ensuring that U.S. taxpayers are not funding globalist pet projects. Restoring sovereignty and national security. A major theme in all 3 articles is the concern that Trump's policies weaken alliances and undermine democratic norms. The Guardian warns that his leadership emboldens authoritarian regimes, yet this perspective ignores how weak leadership from previous U.S. administrations has allowed global adversaries to grow unchecked. Obama's foreign policy, for example, emboldened China's expansion in the South China Sea, allowed Russia to annex Crimea, and resulted in the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. Trump's willingness to engage with strong leaders like Putin and Xi is not a sign of weakness but a recognition that international politics is about power, not virtue signaling. The IBA article takes issue with Trump's approach to international law, particularly regarding trade agreements and NATO. However, it fails to acknowledge that global institutions have repeatedly placed unfair burdens on the United States. Trump's decision to withdraw from or renegotiate deals like the Paris Climate Accord and the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a defense of American workers. These agreements often impose strict regulations on U.S. industries while allowing countries like China and India to operate under lenient standards. Meanwhile, Foreign Affairs suggests that Trump's second term will be even more extreme, as he surrounds himself with loyalists and prioritizes personal authority over bureaucratic expertise. From a right-wing perspective, this is precisely what is needed. For too long, career politicians and entrenched Washington insiders have dictated foreign policy without accountability. Trump's ability to bring in leaders who share his vision for America's future is a rejection of the deep state and a victory for voters who elected him to implement real change. The myth of diplomatic chaos. One of the most common criticisms in all 3 articles is that Trump's leadership creates instability and unpredictability. The Guardian and the IBA claim that his approach to diplomacy weakens America's standing on the world stage. However, history proves that strength commands respect. Trump's willingness to walk away from bad deals, impose tariffs, and pressure allies to contribute more to their defense ensures that America is no longer taken for granted. During Trump's first term, his administration successfully negotiated historic peace deals in the Middle East through the Abraham Accords, proving that diplomacy based on strength and mutual interest is far more effective than endless negotiations with bad faith actors. Contrast this with Obama's weak foreign policy, which saw the rise of ISIS, the deterioration of US-Israel relations, and the disastrous Iran nuclear agreement. Trump's policies prioritize results over empty rhetoric, and his leadership has demonstrated that forceful diplomacy is often more effective than traditional appeasement strategies. Fair trade and economic nationalism. A key aspect of Trump's foreign policy, which all three articles criticize, is his stance on trade. The Guardian and the EBA argue that his trade wars, particularly with China, disrupt global markets. However, these criticisms fail to acknowledge the economic damage caused by decades of unfair trade agreements. Before Trump, the US allowed China to manipulate currency, steal intellectual property, and flood American markets with cheap goods, devastating domestic industries. Trump's tariffs and economic pressure on China were long overdue. They forced the Chinese Communist Party to negotiate from a weaker position, securing better trade deals for American workers. Similarly, his renegotiation of NAFTA into the USMCA, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, protected American jobs and industries from unfair competition. From a right-wing perspective, these policies are not reckless but necessary corrections to decades of economic mismanagement. Reevaluating America's role in global conflicts. Another criticism found in all three articles is Trump's reluctance to engage in prolonged foreign wars. The Guardian and the EBA suggest that his approach weakens U.S. influence, but this argument ignores the failures of interventionist policies. Under Bush and Obama, America became entangled in endless wars in the Middle East, costing trillions of dollars and countless lives, with little to show for it. Trump, by contrast, prioritized withdrawing from unnecessary conflicts while maintaining military strength. His administration oversaw the defeat of ISIS, reduced troop presence in Afghanistan, and resisted pressure to launch new conflicts. His foreign policy is rooted in the idea that America should only engage militarily when absolutely necessary, rather than acting as the world's police force at the expense of its own citizens. A more independent Europe. A final concern raised in The Guardian and the EBA is that Trump's approach to NATO and European relations could weaken Western unity. In reality, his policies encourage European nations to take responsibility for their own defense. For too long, the US has subsidized European security, allowing wealthy nations like Germany and France to underfund their militaries while relying on American protection. Trump's insistence that NATO members pay their fair share is not an abandonment of the alliance but a demand for fairness. By pushing Europe to invest more in its own security, he strengthens the alliance rather than weakening it. Critics see this as a retreat from global leadership, but in reality, it is a strategy that ensures long-term stability without overburdening American taxpayers. Conclusion. Trump's leadership is necessary for global stability. The criticisms presented in The Guardian, the EBA, and Foreign Affairs reflect a globalist perspective that prioritizes international consensus over national sovereignty. From a right-wing point of view, Trump's policies correct decades of weak leadership, ensuring that the US is no longer exploited by foreign governments and international institutions. His America First approach strengthens national security, promotes fair trade, and demands that allies contribute their fair share. Rather than creating instability, Trump's leadership introduces accountability to international relations, proving that strength, negotiation, and economic nationalism are far more effective than the bureaucratic, ineffective diplomacy of past administrations. As Trump reshapes the world order, it is clear that his approach is not a threat but a necessary correction to decades of globalist mismanagement.